very much. And with that introduction, you'll understand why it is that the organizers invited some guy who brings paper up on the stage for an innovation conference. It's because I'm old. I mean, it's simple as that. When I started at the RU in 1995, a long time ago, I actually joined the RU, thinking it was the International Rugby Union, but it wasn't. It was the International Road Transport Union. We were actually created, for those of you, I said that I'm well known, but there might be some of you that don't know who we are. We were created in 1948 to bring together the road transport industry from around the world, but we had a very humble beginning with only 8 countries, and today we're represented in over 100 countries with great activity. I'm very happy to be in Lithuania for many reasons. One, because of Mario Skodas. He's one of our great partners in our Brussels office, dealing with all the EU legislation, but also at global level at the ITF, as was mentioned by Young-Tae Kim, as the president of the ITF in the last mandate, to tackle global issues. You're blessed in this country. You're blessed to have a minister that understands economics. I can't say that of all the countries in the world. And when you understand economics, you start understanding transport and the importance of transport. You've always been here in Lithuania at crossroads historically, and really leaders in so many ways in transport. But I'll show you that I'm going to give a touch of realism to the challenges we're facing in creating resilience in our industry. The first thing is really understanding transport, and I would make a challenge to all of you. Think, and you can intercept me in the coffee area and in the exhibit area. Think of something at home or at your office that has not been on a truck in its production, distribution, anything. You think of it, write it down, and come see me, and I'll tell you why you're wrong if you can actually think of something. Everything at some point goes on a truck, and that's why, in terms of resilience, it's not just a matter of our industry, it's a matter of the economy, and understanding that we must remain resilient for society to continue to function. The image you see here talks about a week without transport. Well, I can tell you the shelves will already be empty by day 3. If we were to actually go 1 week without transport, the economy would take 3 years to recover. So this is something we don't want to get to. In terms of resilience itself, what is it? It's a question of looking at how do we cope with change? But not only cope with change, how do we then adapt? But more importantly, how do we learn from these changes? I can almost guarantee you the next pandemic that we will have, we will forget what we did this time. And why? Because they happen every 100 or so years. And then, the people say, well, what did we do at that time that was right? What did we do that was wrong? The reaction will be a knee-jerk reaction, close the borders, everything shuts down, and everybody starts wearing masks. Okay, I understand that. And I understand that for the first few weeks. But when we get into 1 year, 2 years where everything is shut down, then we know that there's a problem and somebody didn't look at the guidebook as to what do we do during the pandemic. So hopefully we will learn. I'm going to touch on a few issues, what we consider the challenges in our industry, and we call them the 3D challenges, so decarbonization, driver shortage, and digitalization. And each of them, how will that actually impact our ability to be resilient? But much of this is based on what we've just seen and what we've experienced. Last year we celebrated our 75th anniversary, and looking backwards over 75 years, he said, what were we really good at as a road transport industry? And going forward, what should we be committing to? And what we saw is that in all crises, whether it was the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and I must admit this is probably one of the moments that I was most proud to be Secretary General of the RU. The first ones that got to the border were our bus and coach companies that said, how do we help people leave? And also our trucks going in and saying, how do we bring food and other supplies into the Ukraine to help? And this was not for money, this was out of the goodness of their heart saying, how do we help? And in fact, when we look at the earthquakes that are going on, just the hurricanes now going in the United States, the first ones to go in and help are the road transport companies that go in to offer that help. And so we decided we need a new vision for the RU, a new charter that anytime there is a crisis anywhere in the world, we will work with the UN bodies in Geneva, whether it be the UN World Food Program, UNHCR, which looks after refugees, and then work with our national members to say, how do we bring aid where aid is needed, and how do we then become more resilient so that the moment that change happens, the moment that crisis happens, we're there to help. Let me go through what I consider are 3D challenges. The first challenge is drivers. If you want to get something from here to there, until we get to autonomous vehicles, and I'll touch on that in a second, you need drivers. We have a huge crisis today in our industry, like other industries that are missing employees, but we have a huge problem globally. We did a survey last year looking at only 36 countries. One of the biggest problems we see is that 1/3 of our drivers are over 55 years old. So you do the math, pretty soon they'll be retiring. The average age of a driver today is 47 years old. So young by my standards, but old in terms of how long they'll be in the industry. We did a survey in these 36 countries, and we saw that globally speaking, there are 3 million drivers missing. Between now and 2028, we predict that there will be 7 million drivers missing globally. Now, that's only in the 36 countries. If you extrapolate from that and do the mathematics, you can actually get to a figure of about 12 million drivers missing. If you don't have drivers, those vehicles won't move. They'll just sit there, and that means our economy will stop. So this is a huge crisis in our industry. So we have to see, how do we get people into the profession? Well, it's not as easy as you might think. If we look at Lithuania particularly, we have a shortage of 12% in terms of what the demand is, and by 2028 we could increase that to 18%, which is above the EU average, which will be 17%. Of course, we need to attract youth into the industry, and we need to attract women into the industry. 6% of truck drivers in the world are women. Here you lag behind. I love to say that Lithuania is a leader in so many aspects, but here you're really lagging behind. Lithuania, you have 0.5% of your drivers are women. I see a lot of women in the audience. You're not driving vehicles, are you? You're driving your cars, you're driving your e-bikes, whatever, but you're not driving trucks. Join the profession. You'll absolutely love it. Where you are leaders is in youth. You have 10.9% of your truck drivers are under 25, so bravo for that. The EU average is 4.8, so at least you're bringing the youth in, so that's extremely good news. But innovation will be key. When I talk to my sons who are 24 and 25, this is how they talk. They talk through this thing here. You have to be innovative, and in terms of our drivers, we have to show how the industry is exciting, how it is innovative. And unless you can create that excitement of innovation and importance, you won't get them in. For women, well, we have another issue. Women, come join the profession, and you're going to hang out with a bunch of guys at a parking area when you have to stop for social regulations, except we have one little problem. There are only 300,000 parking areas in the EU. We need another 100,000 to actually meet demand. And out of those 300,000, only 7,000 are registered as being secure, have actually been certified. So it's pretty tough for me to say, come join the profession, women, but then you're going to hang out with a whole bunch of guys at a parking lot. So that's something we need to work on seriously. And then, of course, I think the most fundamental thing in attracting people to the profession is recognizing the worth of that job. During the pandemic, our drivers were called heroes. I always knew they were heroes, but then finally some people started saying, these are the people that are bringing us our food. Despite us having to stay at home, we're still able to eat. They're bringing us our medicine. They're actually delivering all of the vaccines. They kept working while we were at home nice and comfortable. Again, whenever there's a crisis, they're the first ones there. They'll put their lives at risk to be able to make sure that we can enjoy the quality of life that we come to know. With this, we decided last year to give our Grand Prix d'honneur that we normally give to somebody who's created a very heroic act, and we gave the Grand Prix d'honneur of the RU to all drivers for their heroism, and every day they step into one of those commercial vehicles. So we need to recognize them for what they are, heroes. So do join the profession and we'll get you the secure parking. The other challenge we're facing, decarbonization. Most countries in the world, in fact some 140 of them, have set a target for 2050 to be at zero carbon emissions. China, Saudi Arabia have said 2060, but then there are a number that also said we'll be at a certain level in 2030, 2040, including in the EU. Also plans to phase out internal combustion engines. In doing that, I would argue that you're going to then create 40% unemployment in the constructors industry, because 40% employment is to make the motor. So if we're saying, as we were talking earlier about China, that China's making these vehicles, we buy the batteries, put the battery in the vehicle, so you're creating jobs in China, but you're not creating jobs in Europe. So to be seen how we actually get. I think the smarter thing is let's put clean fuel and alternative fuels in the combustion engines we already have. We need to demonstrate how sustainability equals profitability. When I joined the RU, a long time ago, yes, you heard 1995, the first thing I did in 1996 was I had the membership sign what we call the Charter for Sustainable Development. And how I did that was to tell the transport industry, by the way, when you're trying to save fuel, you're saying that's for my pocket, but it actually has environmental impacts. So demonstrating that sustainability equals profitability is a way to get the industry to really back the whole idea of going carbon neutral. And it can be done, but we have to do it in very pragmatic ways. This Charter for Sustainable Development, we actually then put it into our Constitution, where I, as the RU Secretary General, have a constitutional obligation to drive towards sustainable development. We've now created at the RU what we call the Green Compact, which is a roadmap. How do we get from now to 2050 to become carbon neutral? Now, knowing that every region of the world is different. We're not just dealing with the EU, we're dealing with the entire world. And every country and every region has a different energy environment in terms of how you get from here to there. What we have to do is two phases. Firstly, looking at us, what we can do to reduce our energy consumption through efficiency measures, and then the tougher and more expensive role of how do we change our energy, what do we find in terms of hydrogen, e-fuels, et cetera, et cetera. So it's both ways, but what I argue is that in 2050, there's not some magic button we push and then, oh, we're carbon neutral, hooray. No, it has to start today. And we have to put in place all the measures that allow us today to already reduce our carbon emissions. For example, and Marius knows my comment on this one very much, if we were to move to eco trucks, so we have a tractor with 2 trailers, we can reduce our carbon emissions today by 30%. And as I said at the ITF in Leipzig, which was not very much appreciated by the rail industry, but it's a true statement, are we here to decarbonize, to reduce our CO2 footprint, to save humanity, as we are told, because of climate change? If this is our objective, then we should do everything possible. Or are we here to save the railways? I'm sorry to say, but the reason we're blocking this is the railways are saying, no, this will cause unnecessary competition in the railways. I'm sorry, again, do we want to save the planet and human beings from global warming? Or do we want to save the railways? When you guys can tell me the answer to that, then we can act. But today we can reduce by 30%. It's not just that. We talked about border crossing earlier. We've seen that in Saudi Arabia, we can reduce our carbon emissions crossing the border by 90%, 90%, by putting in place the right instruments. We can reduce by 15% today by training our drivers, and reduce by 15% their energy consumption. And this then, when we go to other vehicles, whether they be electric vehicles or whatever, that training will help them to also make sure that we use less energy. All of this will be fundamental. Also, we have to never, ever forget, and it was mentioned by the EU speaker, that we have to look at public transport. Buses and coaches are the cheapest way to actually use the safest and most environmentally friendly mode of transport, and at 1/10 the cost to governments than putting in place something that goes on rails. The last challenge, digitalization. I go back to this thing here that my sons always communicate with me, and this is how they know I exist, is through the phone. This has changed radically how we live. When I remember as a kid, when I saw Space Odyssey, 2001: A Space Odyssey, and I saw in the movie that they were talking to each other in space and looking at a phone and said, that'll never happen in our lifetime. Little did we know that on our phone we can do absolutely everything today. The biggest challenge now we're looking at, and the biggest innovation, will be artificial intelligence. My son actually works at Microsoft in artificial intelligence, and he keeps saying to me, Papa, Papa, in such a disappointed way. You need to understand what it is, because we can say, oh, I've got this app. He said, yeah, that's an app. Artificial intelligence means it thinks for you. It replaces your brain. It actually does things smarter. And that's why we see that it'll have huge effects on our industry in terms of route optimization, vehicle maintenance, driver performance, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But the other thing is that AI will allow us to move more quickly towards automation. At the ITF, we produced a study some 5-6 years ago saying that by now we should have 30% of the fleets that are autonomous. The technology exists. We saw one just go by this morning. All the technology is there. It's a matter of how do we get everybody to buy into it, governments to accept it, laws to change. Again, the technology is there. We can do it. It will not only make us more efficient, it'll make us safer, knowing that 85% of accidents are caused by anyone? Us. Us. So if you remove us, the cause of 85% of the accidents, and just have autonomous vehicles, yes, you'll still have accidents, but much less than the 85%. So the transition from here to there will be a tough transition, but we need to get that done. Lastly, border crossing. We talk about sustainable development. I don't see how we have the audacity to talk about sustainable development in this day and age when we think sustainable development is economic development, social equity, environmental protection. Reality is when we get to a border in many countries, our trucks don't wait a few hours. They wait days, even weeks to get from one side to the other. And we talk about sustainable development, economic development, the trucks are blocked, the economy is blocked. Social equity, our drivers are held hostage. Environmental protection, are you kidding me? The trucks are just inching ahead, trying not to lose their spot. Burning fuel for nothing when we can go right through from one side to the other like we saw in Saudi Arabia in 90% less time. We don't just need electronic CMR, we need e-CMR, e-tier, e-visas, e-permits, we need absolutely everything. On e-CMR, in terms of political will, e-CMR came into effect, the protocol, in 2008. Out of the 58 countries of the CMR convention that there's an e-CMR protocol, only 34 since 2008 are in the e-CMR protocol. In the EU, there are still 5 that have not signed the protocol. Are you kidding me? And we talk about digitalization. This is the basic thing. Every transport movement starts or ends by truck, so you need to have CMR. How can you have anything autonomous? The autonomous vehicle is not going to say, okay, I'm going to move, and by the way, I'm going to bring all these pieces of paper with me. Digital will be imperative if we want autonomy in our vehicles. Digital will be imperative if we want intermodal transport. 95% of all the information and all the documents is the same, so why don't we just have a platform that you put everything in once and then be able to talk to one another. How we do this, and this is how I will conclude, as my time is now up. In road transport, we're always on time and we stop when we have to, is partnership. I developed a slogan at the RU when I was 5 years into the organization, inspired by Kofi Annan, who said, the only way we can achieve our sustainable goals is to work in public-private partnership. In fact, the RU has 75 years of public-private partnership with the UN, the longest public-private partnership in the history of the UN. It's only by working together, all of us with governments, us with our clients, and all other partners, will we achieve all of these goals. Resilience is a must. It's not a nice to have. And the only way we'll do it is through partnership and working together. Sorry that I took a few more seconds, and sorry for the paper. Thank you very much for your attention.